we head to Thailand, where this morning the government has called on protesters to stop their attacks so that it can consider entering into negotiations with them. The move follows a violent turn in the standoff between government forces and the so-called red shirts over the last few days. Indeed, more than 35 people have been killed in the violence since Thursday, and Bangkok is now the scene of a dangerous and determined standoff between government forces and the red-shirted protesters who are calling on the Prime Minister to resign and to call fresh elections. So just who are the red shirts and what can be done to avoid an escalation of the crisis? Well, I'm joined now by David Camroux, who's a research fellow and specialist in Southeast Asia at Sciences Po here in Paris. Thanks ever so much for being with us. Now, first of all, they're usually described, very often described, as the red-shirted supporters of Thaksin Shinawatra, the former Prime Minister ousted in a coup in 2006. And yet, this is about much more than Thaksin Shinawatra.
It is about much more. I mean, there are, in fact, three crises occurring at the same time. There is the political crisis, which opposes the red shirts against the yellow shirts. But there's a social crisis, which is the poor north and the poor of Bangkok against the Bangkok establishment, so to speak. And also there is a problem of the succession of King Bhumipol Rama IX. So the red shirts partly are supportive of Thaksin, but not only supporters of Thaksin, and the red shirts themselves are divided. That is also part of the problem.
And these red shirts represent largely rural communities, many of them from northern Thailand, as you mentioned. They are asking for nothing short of fresh elections. Is that something they're likely to get?
If the situation continues, they're not likely to get it immediately. They want fresh elections. Abbasid, the Prime Minister, did promise elections in November. That's not soon enough for at least for some of the red shirts. There were some of the red shirts who were willing to accept that. Thaksin himself from the Gulf has also intervened to say there should be fresh negotiations. But the red shirts are divided on the question. There are hardliners who want the protest to continue.
And one of the features of the last few days, I mentioned just a moment ago, the escalation in violence. There's been a change of tone. The protests had been described initially as very peaceful, very good-natured. There was music playing. The descriptions were invariably around the good-natured side of the protests. And yet, over the last few days, things have changed. What triggered that change? Why have the red shirts turned violent?
I think that, well, now we have a martyr. We have the general who was shot by snipers has died in hospital. So this is a rather dangerous situation. We've now got a martyr for the cause, so to speak. And, you know, there was we started to get to a situation of tit-for-tat violence, so to speak, with an escalation, a vicious circle of violence. I think what the red shirts feel is that they are treated in a rather different way than the yellow shirts, who, after all, a year ago occupied the airport and, you know, caused chaos, and none of them have ever been convicted or punished or anything.
Of course, this is, in some respects, although from a different point of view, history repeating itself, the yellow shirts that you mentioned had held protests, which had led to the downfall of Thaksin Shinawatra himself. Tell us a little bit about the yellow shirts. And
Thaksin Shinawatra's successor. I mean, Thaksin himself was the first Prime Minister since the end of the Thai monarchy, the absolute monarchy in 1932, to have a majority in Parliament. And it was the first time that Thailand actually had a strong Prime Minister who had a program, a populist program, in favour of the poor. Each village, 1 million baht, you know, healthcare at 30 baht per person. A million baht is about 50,000 euros, 40,000 euros. And so Thaksin raised expectations amongst the poor. He was, in a sense, their hero. And they saw how he was treated. He was deposed in a coup d'etat 4 years ago. Two successor governments of his supporters were also removed through dubious constitutional means. And so
partly through the pressure from these yellow shirts. It has worked before.
It has worked before from the yellow shirts, but now the red shirts are saying, hang on, you claim you're defending democracy and yet you use undemocratic means. All we're asking for is, you know, democratic elections, and yet you're opposing that. So there is a situation of stalemate. The problem is that none of the forces in presence are sufficiently strong to impose a solution. They're sufficiently strong to bring about a stalemate, but they themselves are divided. The army is divided. The army, the young soldiers don't want to shoot people who, in fact, from their same social milieu. The government's divided in the sense of whether they should be hardline or take a soft line, and the red shirts themselves are divided. So it's a rather worrying situation in which there is a lack of leadership on any side, and of course the king is not intervening so far and is unlikely to do so, it would appear.
Now, some see that as possibly the key when you have this extraordinary confrontation, which, as you've explained, is quite profound and goes to the very core of Thai society, that perhaps this highly respected king, a word from him might help to unblock the situation.
It might. It has in the past in various crises, in 92, in 1976, a word from the king ended the crisis. The problem is the king is rather ill. He's been in hospital since September. And so in the background, there is also a fin de règne, where at the end of this particular monarch's long period on the throne, and his successor, the Crown Prince, is extremely unpopular and is considered a supporter of Thaksin Shinawatra. So there is also a situation in which the monarchy cannot play the kind of role it has played in previous crises.
Now, the other possibility, I suppose, would be for everyone to sit around a negotiating table. The protesters have said they wanted UN-mediated talks. The government have said that they don't want foreign intervention. Do you think that some kind of move might come from one side or the other to allow negotiations to start?
There may be some kind of negotiations, perhaps involving ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. That would perhaps be a reasonable kind of option. But I hardly see that happening. We've now reached a level of distrust, a level of animosity, that it's difficult to see negotiations occurring, at least in the immediate future, so that there will be an escalation of violence, I would predict.
Is there the danger as well that this might spread well beyond Bangkok and grip the entire country?
There have been some demonstrations in the north of Thailand. It has been largely contained in Bangkok and the Bangkok region, because the poor who come from the north, the farmers, actually work in Bangkok. They often work on the building sites and then go back to the farms or to plant rice. So it's the same kind of social milieu. There is this incredibly cleavage. Bangkok is 9 times richer than the north, and this is part of the social background for this crisis, this incredible sense of inequality.
Because, of course, Thailand has been one of those countries that's done extraordinarily well economically over the last 10, 20 years. Is that really part of that, the problem of the aspiration of some of the masses and the inability really to achieve what it is they hope to achieve? Is that part of what's
It's part of that. I mean, the Thai miracle, as in all of the Asian miracle, has been built on having cheap food, and therefore paying farmers less than perhaps they deserve for their crops. And so we're reaching also the end of this sort of cleavage, city, countryside, urban, rural cleavage that has been the basis of the Thai miracle. The Thais are actually shooting themselves in the foot because Thailand is now suffering, although there hasn't been a massive abandoning of foreign direct investment, but it's starting to have economic implications and starting to affect tourism, which is, after all, 6% of the economy.
So very briefly, because we're running out of time, you're the next few days unlikely to see any resolution, and do you foresee the increase of violence yet further?
There is going to be an increase in violence, I think, in the next few days. It's possible that the king may intervene. I mean, I wouldn't totally exclude it, but it would require a compromise with Thaksin Shinawatra. If Thaksin actually was allowed to return and to rally his troops and to agree to some kind of ceasefire or some kind of peace, then perhaps a solution is possible.
Cameron, thanks very much indeed for being with us. We'll be bringing you all the very latest headlines from Bangkok, from our correspondents there. That's all there's time for on this programme. We'll be back in just a few moments, though, with all the very latest international headlines. Do stay tuned.
In 2 months, Belgium takes over the EU's rotating presidency. But the country hasn't had a government since its collapse last month. Flemish separatists want more autonomy. French speakers fear it would lead to Belgium's breakup. Ordinary citizens are sick of the political paralysis. Can the elections in June break the gridlock? Or will it be bye-bye Belgium? Reporters. Today, 11:40 a.m. Paris time on France 24.